Hey, welcome to Worship Launch. My name is Zach Dietz, and it's our goal here to equip worship leaders to build healthier teams. Today, I am joined by Jerry Boyd and Scott Meeks. These guys are both pastors on staff here with me at Evergreen Church, and these guys were both actually worship leaders before they took their current positions. And so today's topic is I'm the new guy. How do I transition a church's worship ministry? So we're going to talk about that because these guys have walked through that. And so I want to start with Jerry this morning. I want to just ask you, when you were the new guy, what battles did you face as the new guy?
Well, in every church I've served, Zach, every church was different. Sometimes they were more established churches, and you were following somebody, and so you were walking into the DNA in the history of the church and a music predecessor. But unlike here, I was the first guy in a full-time status, and so you have to kind of look at each situation in a different kind of a different light, but. No matter the fact, there were transitions, that you have to face, like any leadership you have to face. And so I think one of the challenges, and I wouldn't really consider them great challenges, especially when it applied to here, but one of my mentors in the ministry taught me very early to say that, first of all, just be yourself. Sometimes we can fall into that trap that we have to be better than our predecessor, right, or at least up to that same. But just to be yourself, be who God created you to be, and remain open and fluid, and to be teachable, and to be humble. And so you're going to face a lot of different transitions, in ministry at different levels. Right. And so you just got to face it, each situation at a time. Mm-hmm. And first of all, also not only just remaining fluid and be yourself, but also it's very important that you have a strong relationship with that pastor, that invites you onto his staff, because he trusts you to work within his vision of the church and where the church is at that time, and being able to accomplish and reaching the target audience that you're trying to do as a church. Yeah. And so that relationship with the pastor, as well as those other things, are very, very important.
Yeah, and I would say, even, when you're talking about the vision of the pastor, find that stuff out in the interview.
Absolutely.
Well in advance.
Ask him about his vision for the church, and make sure that where your heart is lines up with his heart. Yeah. But Scott, what about you? Did you face any battles as the new guy in a church?
Yeah, I've been the new guy 3 times, but it's always been in established churches. So when I was the new guy in worship here at Evergreen, I had already participated in Jerry's worship ministry, and I knew where he had brought the church. So stepping into that, the only challenge was a personality of leadership difference. So that wasn't a big deal. The worship team here adapted real easily, and we moved forward quickly. And you got to remember, personalities come into play. Just like preaching is truth through personality, worship leading is leading people to the throne through the personality of the leader. And so that's important, that you give people time to adjust to your personality. In a previous church, I was tasked with transitioning a church from a very traditional hymn-driven model with piano and organ only to a much more contemporary version with a full band, a worship team of singers, as we called it then. And I was not brand new on the scene when we did that, but I did have to lead that transition. And that was quite a challenge, because this church was very grounded in some specific styles. And worship style becomes kind of a heart language of worship for people. So what we were asking them to do was not abandon their language, but transition and blend in a new language at the same time, so to speak, become bilingual in worship. Now, I had a distinct advantage that my pastor was the drummer in my band. And so he was able to be a part of all of that transition. And so we had to feel it out week by week as we planned worship, and take it a step at a time, as far as how we use the instruments, how we introduce different harmonies or vocal aspects of the songs. But it was difficult. It was a challenge. But we got through it, and I think the church prospered because of it.
I've been the new guy twice now, here at Evergreen, and then once at the church before I came here. And the church I was at before Evergreen, it was a young congregation. It was basically all contemporary music. It was already set up that way when I got there. But when I came here, I was trying to kind of discern where this church was at. It was harder for me because I wasn't familiar with Evergreen, and so I was trying to kind of feel it out. And but when I got here, the first part of my interview was to lead worship for the congregation, and as I was leading, man, I just saw that this church was ready to move forward. But where I think I went wrong was not embracing that this is a multi-generational church. And so we have for lack of better term, we have a traditional early service, which I tried to start taking that service in a more contemporary way really fast, and I think I should have slowed that down a little more. But now, and I talked about this in the very first video we did on the worship launch, so you can go check that out. But I've realized the value of those old hymns, and the Bible there is full of passages that say to sing a new song to the Lord, and there's 3 Psalms that even start with that phrase. But I also have discovered how those songs that we can just let get entrenched in our hearts, how that can be very valuable. Because right now, I have an iPad on my stand and I rely on those lyrics. Yeah. But those songs that I first memorized back in the 90s when Shout to the Lord and these kind of songs were coming out, there were only a select few of those that we were singing. And so those just got ingrained, and I can still sing those songs by heart today. And so I see the value of those hymns because those are what the older generation has sung for years. What do you?
Yeah, in hymns, I think we've had a mindset in the church where we say hymns, older generation, contemporary worship, younger generation, the new worship songs. But I think as we look at scriptures and as leaders in the church, especially as worship leaders, God is a jealous God, and He has created us in a creative likeness of His Son, Jesus Christ, in His image, and we can worship Him in many different ways. But the Word of God, is very specific to worship Him with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. And you just have to define, what those are and what they are to your DNA at the church, that you serve at. It's very unique what I see going on at Evergreen during this time. We do 2 services, and you use those terms, traditional and contemporary, and we've been using those in church life for a lot of years, just trying to give a picture.
Right.
But those mean different things. They're not biblical, for one thing. You don't see that term in the Word of God. You just have to decide and determine what does that look like for you as a people. And so traditional may be forms of music. It may be a song usage. It may be, a song selection, but...
or text style.
Or text style. But it's an exciting time, at least for me, and I know Scott feels the same way, serving in this position and, seeing a return maybe to some of those older songs and gospel songs. And music comes and goes, and I think that's where we get hung up a lot when it comes to style and how the sounds have changed, over the years. But those are going to continue to change.
Yeah.
I mean, we can go back to 17th century and 16th century and what worship music looked like, or come to the 1900s where a lot of the tunes of the songs that were used in worship came out of the bars.
Straight out of the bars.
And so you can have those discussions when it comes to church history. But the main thing is to find songs that the point is to Jesus, and to learn more about who His nature and who His character is. Those are the songs that are standing the test of time, and that we've got to hang on to, in times such as, these uncertain times that we're living in. We need those rocks. We need those truths.
Well, and it's important to remember there's really no such thing as Christian music, because music is a mathematical formula applied to tones, vibration, and music is just tone. There's Christian lyric, and the lyric, the set of words that each song uses, that's what's significant. And just as you do when you vet worship songs, you're very, very careful about the text. Does it biblically sound? Does it edify? Does it throw in anything that is other than Jesus? And that's the important thing. So the type of music to which that text is applied is actually secondary. And we do understand that musical style is part of somebody's heart language and their worship language. But we have one of our teachers here who he'll frequently ask people if they complain about music, which they don't hear, but they have other places. He would say, did that song bother God? And if it doesn't bother God, then we need to allow it to minister to those in the congregation that enjoy it and can worship through it, and, just do our best to get out of the way.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned songs, hymns, and spiritual songs, and that's actually, we have a video planned for Worship Launch on that very topic, because our pastor actually preached a sermon on songs, hymns, and spiritual songs, and how those words don't necessarily mean what they mean today,
right.
What the biblical text means. And our pastor always says the Bible means what it means, not what it says. And so it's important to read Scripture and study Scripture, not just read it for how you want it to apply to your own life, but to really study what the text means. But another question I have for you guys is, and you've already touched on this a little bit, but did you have to do any transitioning from one music style to another, and how did that go for you?
You want to start that?
I have scars. We, at a previous church, we were very intentional in transitioning the worship style. And it was during the era of the 90s, the Saddleback church growth explosion. And we had visited Saddleback and some of the church conferences and other church growth conferences around the country. And we had some very specific styles in mind we were moving to, making sure that they were suitable, they were sound, they were going to enhance worship and not become a distraction. But we had a lot of resistance. But I think what we did right was we moved slowly. We didn't suddenly come in one Sunday and have a set of 6 songs that they had never sung before. And that's another thing about introducing new music. One a week, one new song a week is plenty. But we did it slowly and intentionally, and along the way, we expressed a why. Why do we need to do this? We did not abandon the songs that people had grown up with and knew by heart. We incorporated things all along the way, but people are not so resistant to change if they know why. Right. And so as we expressed that we were targeting another demographic in our area that our church simply was not reaching, people were a little more open to it. And then as they got used to the song, they realized, I like these songs. Yeah. They enjoyed it. So we were slower about it. We were paced in how we introduced music, and we made sure they understood why.
Yeah, and I think, there are a lot of worship pastors who rush into introducing new songs, and it's like you may have a new one every week. And I think it's Paul Balash that says, he introduces a new song and then he plays that song for 3 or 4 weeks. Right. Yeah. Let it sink into their hearts, let them get a hold of it, then take a break and then come back to the song. And then once you've been singing that for a month or 2, then you can introduce a new song. And that's kind of what I've lived by here. And when I first came here, there were several songs that you guys have been doing that I didn't know, but the congregation loved them, and so I learned them, and we sang them for a while, and in time they've kind of fallen by the wayside, but we revisit those songs sometimes, and so What about you, Jerry? Did you?
Yeah, everything Scott said was right on target. And I think another important thing that we need to remember is knowing who our congregation is and getting outside, that we're not there to perform for them.
Right.
That we're there to do life with them. We're a multi-generational church. We mentioned that earlier. We're not a church that just has all older adults or younger adults and define our ministries. We're a multi-generational church, and we find creative ways to bring our church together to do ministry together, whether worship or to fulfill the purposes of the church. And I think it's important as leaders and as worship leaders that not just to do our jobs with excellence and to do our crafts well as worship leaders. I mean, I know I fell in the trap in the beginning days. I was thinking about every transition, every key, every whatever that we're trying to present, but not become a lead worshiper and actually worship ourselves. But knowing who your church is, I think it's important to, and I know I'm working harder at, since I'm the adult pastor, most of my time is spent with a lot of folks 50, 55 and older. I think for me to be the best leader and pastor I can be, I've got to have relationships with our younger generations. Absolutely. And so that means spending time doing ministry with them, being there for them in their crisis points. And as a worship leader, I know you're leading us working very, very hard, even though we have two different services, but have a representation of those generations on that platform, and saying that every person is valuable, in the kingdom of God. But getting to know each generation and spending time with them, and I know that's hard because that's more time on us, away from what our purposes are. But in the long run, it really makes a difference that you love somebody not for what you want them to do for you, but you just love them because of who Christ is in them, to saying that this is about loving the Lord and about loving ministry together.
And I think that what you just said is the pastor side of this whole thing.
Right.
Like you've really, I would just encourage new worship leaders, before you start changing styles, before you do anything, get to know your people. And I even think about senior pastors. Sometimes there are some denominations when a senior pastor leaves, they hire an outside guy. And I'm not saying right or wrong, but what I love here is that Michael, our pastor, tries to hire within as much as he can, because these people already know the heartbeat of the church. And I was an outsider. I wasn't from Evergreen. And if you watched our last video with our pastor, he talked about how he took almost 2 years to find a worship pastor, because he wanted to know that it was going to match what the vision of this church is. And but get to know your people. Learn what they love, and shepherd them. So before you go into changing music styles or anything like that, know your people. But did y'all have any mentors that influenced you as a worship pastor? And if so, what did you learn from them?
Well, I think the best thing that I learned from the men that God put in my life is they really taught me about servant leadership, and they spent time with me and allowed me to shadow them, because that's the best way you can learn when it comes to your craft or your ministry focus, as a pastor and leader of the church. I've sat under a lot of wonderful, leaders in my life, and they looked at this 16-year-old kid, and allowed me to come be a part of their ministry and to participate and use as my gifts and to grow, and to learn. And I've been blessed when it comes to that, and I've had many different mentors, in the ministry, some on the musical side, some in servant leadership, pastoral side. But that has been a blessing to me. And I know one of my greatest mentors, his name was Max Alexander. He was at Putnam City Baptist Church as a minister of music for many years, and the Lord switched him over to doing what I'm doing, for the church later on in his years of life. But that time with a church and with investing in people, paid great dividends, in his ministry. And he really taught me a lot about what it means to be a pastor. I think a lot of us, we came up through the ranks where you're a minister of music, and even before that, you're the song leader. We have our terminologies from times and ages and all that. But he's really the guy in my life that really taught me what it means, to be a pastor, of a local church, and that's totally different.
Yeah, it
than
is.
just being a paradigm leader. So.
Yeah. What about you, Scott?
So.
Yeah, I grew up in a great church in Houston, Tallowood Baptist, with Tom Mosley and Randy Kilpatrick as our worship leaders. And those guys recognized an interest I had in music and then worked with me not just to be a vocalist, but to learn how music ministry functions and to learn how to transfer the musical excellence into ministry so it made a difference in people's lives. And they really nurtured that through my high school years. Then through college, I was an intern with Rick Wessinger in Waco, and then in seminary, I was an intern with Alvy Allison in Arlington. And I learned so much from those guys about how to plan and how to work with a senior pastor and how to be not in charge in that aspect. Because while you might be in charge of your music ministry, the pastor is called to be in charge of the church, and learning to be a subordinate role there. Then, some of the other aspects of ministry. In Alabama, I learned from Daryl Krim how to make hospital visits and how to have that pastoral side. Then a pastor here in Sand Springs, Rick Cope, I learned so much from him about how to deal with conflict and how to walk with conflict. Now, I didn't have the conflict with him. I was watching him handle it in other places. And those are aspects of ministry. Our training, we were trained as classical musicians. And frankly, our training back in the day in seminary lacked enough theological training. It lacked pastoral training. It lacked a significant amount of practical application. Now, they've adjusted that in recent years. But so we had to be involved with people who were doing it day to day to supplement the training we were receiving. So we learned how to handle the pastoral aspect of it.
Yeah, and I had the advantage of growing up as a pastor's kid. And my dad was a youth pastor. He was a missions pastor, but he was very musically inclined. And so my dad played guitar. Both of my brothers played guitar. And so I learned musically really well from them. But, being a pastor's kid, I also, our church that I grew up in had a lot of issues. And my parents would try to talk alone in their room, but as a kid, I overheard things. And so I learned that it's not always rainbows and butterflies in the church, and that there are issues in the church, and that, as Matt Chandler says, the sheep can bite. So, and so I think it actually helped me a little bit, gave me an advantage to see that side of the church, because it learned me. I think it taught me how to grow as in the pastor side of being a worship leader. And so, but anyway, I would just suggest to you guys, if you're a new worship leader, find a mentor, find somebody that you can sit under and just watch. And if it's your worship pastor, if he's got time for you to come sit under him and just learn some things, see how he shepherds his people, do it. Take advantage of that. But even just a worship leader, see if you can find somebody that you can sit under and just learn what it means to be a pastor before you learn what it means to be a worship leader. And so I just want to ask you two guys to just, what advice would you give to a worship pastor who's just taken over at a new church? Maybe he's a young guy, maybe he's not, but let's speak to new worship leaders. How about, and what would you say to a new and young worship pastor that's taken a new job at a church?
Well, I think first of all, you need to surround yourself with some accountability and some people in your life that's going to be praying for you. I think that's very, very crucial, because we're all a part of something more than just ourselves. And so when we realize that we're in a leadership position and that responsibility, so I think prayer is important. So find those prayer warriors in the church. I hope that would be your senior pastor. That would be your biggest fan, because that's who is inviting you on his staff. I alluded to earlier, be yourself. You can only be the best that you can be. And I think in time and being patient, we've alluded to that, and knowing your congregation, I think are crucial key points. And just don't forget to not take yourself so seriously. I can remember when I first started leading worship, and I'd get off the platform and I said, man, that was just terrible. And then I'd have someone come up after the service and say, I just want you to know, I need exactly that word of exhortation that you said, or that song that God led you to. You don't realize my week. And so it just taught me that don't get so caught up on the stuff. Don't take yourself seriously, because in the long run, it's not about us.
Yeah,
this is about our responsibility of leading people to the throne of grace and allowing His ministry, to flow in that individual's life. And so those are just some basic things to keep in mind, to help encourage you along the way.
Yeah, I love that. How about you, Scott?
Bouncing off something, edit that. Bouncing off of something that Jerry said, personal intercessor, enlisting somebody that you can be in touch with on a regular basis to lift up specific prayer requests for you, for your family, for your ministry. Then, as you start out in a new place, evaluate what does and doesn't need to change right away. Some things are critical, and they need critical attention right away. But a lot of the things that you're going to want to do, you need to hold off on and let people get to know you, get to know them. Don't make any major changes for maybe up to 6 months. Excuse me. Then, as you begin to make those changes, pay attention to how people are receiving and responding, because you're there to serve the Lord by serving the church. They're not there to make you feel better about what you're doing in your ministry, and that's significant. Other things as you step into something new is to be focused on where you are and what you're doing. It has been said that the average tenure for a worship pastor is only about 18 months. I really don't know if that's accurate anymore, but we need to be looking long term. If we focus on using it as a stepping stone for a short period of time and then take off to the next thing, we've damaged that church, and we'll leave them damaged. And we have to be working long term and wait for God to make the call on when we do or don't move on anywhere. But, and yes, we do move through ministry places at times. I've had one that was only 18 months. It was a different situation. And then God made it clear it was time to move. So, but we need to be focused on where we're serving and make sure we're doing the best we can in that situation, and just let the Spirit use it.
And I completely agree about being invested right where you're at. Don't see this as a stepping stone to the next big stage, the next big church, whatever. If you're in a small church, man, invest there. Learn your people. And I've just seen here at Evergreen the benefit of longevity. And I've only been here 6 years now, but had I left after a year, I'm just now starting to really get to know our people, and so, man, stick with it. Dig deep in that church that you're at, and just invest in your people. But Scott and Jerry, thank you guys so much for joining us today. Let's do this again. And if you're not subscribed to our channel, make sure and hit the subscribe button and hit the little bell button, and that just helps you stay notified when we release a new video. And also comment in the comment section below and let us know what topics you want us to cover here at the Worship Launch. So thank you for joining us. Have a great day.